Hey everyone, welcome back to the React TDD live stream. I'm Josh Justice, as always. I'm still myself. And today I am finally sporting my Cypress IO t-shirt. I'm not sure that I've worn that on the stream before. They were kind enough to send it to me because people keep mistaking me for someone who works at Cypress. I don't, I just wish I did, and maybe I will someday. No, I love where I work now, but I would also love to work there someday because it's really cool, as you've seen. So I have a few resources to share with you today before we jump into the content. First of all, I've mentioned before that I have this website, LearnTDD, learntdd.in, and you can check it out if you want to kind of find out more information about test-driven development and all kinds of different frameworks. Send your friends that use other frameworks than you. Specifically on the React page, I've updated it with a conference talk that I've done recently. So if you go to the page, LearnTDD in React, you'll see a link to the conference talk. So at the Connect Tech conference, I gave a talk on TDD in React. Very similar to one of our first videos together as we were getting started. It's more polished than a live stream, as you might imagine. So if you want to get a recap on what TDD in React is all about, or if you have friends you'd like to share it with, this would be a great link to share with them. So feel free to do that. Also, I have some content that's in that talk that I haven't shared here in the stream, why test-driven development. So there's a page, why TDD, not the letter Y, TDD, WHY, TDD, on the website where I describe my thoughts on why you might want to consider test-driven development as opposed to testing after you've written your production code. So check it out. I have 3 reasons, and one of them is longer than the others. Check it out and let me know what you think. The links are down in the show notes as always. What else? The other thing was, I've been talking as we've been going through our tests, as we've looked at the Cypress test, we've been taking an approach out that is called feature tours. And I was looking around for resources describing how this is done, and I wasn't able to find any. I asked my friend Jay Hayes, who I used to work with at Big Nerd Ranch. He wasn't aware of any resources either, but he's the person I learned it from, and so he was kind enough to put together a blog post. This link is also in the show notes, but it's on iamvery.com. That is his screen name. Talking about feature tours, like why you might want to consider walking through the sequence events in your feature tests, and it works with Cypress, with RSpec test for Rails, any kind of end-to-end test approach you might be taking. So check that out to read a bit more of the rationale of why you might want to consider feature tours. So next, I want to recap on some of the challenges that I had last week and things that I struggled with. So the point that we got to the point of getting the error label overlapping the submit button on a small screen width. But I was wanting to actually clear out the form validation error upon canceling. And I wasn't able to get that working while we were on the stream. So let's take a look at what I was able to do to get that working, and I will just refresh my memory. So I will I'll show you the link real quick. And again, this is down in the show notes as well. But if you go to GitHub, coding it wrong, and then you go to loading, I need to put it on my pinned repositories. React TDD. React TDD live stream. This is the repo that we have, and pull request 7 is the pull request from last week, including the extra steps that I took to figure things out after we streamed together. So let's take a look at this change. So this is the change I was able to get the modal clear out validation errors when closed. So I was really struggling with this, and I'll switch back to the code to show you on the stream live, which is all very exciting for all of us, I'm sure. I was trying a reset form and a number of different other methods that Formic makes available to us to try to clear out that validation error. And I figured reset form would do it, but it seemed like it was not. So it turns out that I was trying out all these methods in the handle save method, but that's not what we were doing. We were canceling out of the form. And the deal was that this was actually a cancel button that was provided by React Materialize, our UI library. It was provided by React Materialize, and we didn't have any hooks into it to execute code when that happened. Let me see if I can find that in the docs here to show you. So just with a basic modal here, you provide a button for the trigger, but then when you open it up, there's a close button, and that's provided for you as a convenience, which is in fact very convenient if you don't have anything you need to run when you're closing it. But we had something we wanted to run. We wanted to clear out that form when we closed it out. So I'm sure there's a nicer way to style this visually, because there always is when it comes to me. But what I ended up doing is this. I ended up, instead of having, well, there's the test. Let's go down from the test. This is the test. I think we wrote this out at the time. We wrote out a test that would try opening up the modal, try saving it to get a validation error, and then would try closing it out and confirming that that error should not be visible once it came back up. So that test was there. And so what we did is this. Instead, I have missed one of the things that we've done here. So where? Oh, you know what? I think that was a different step there. So we'll look at that step in a second. So what I did was I actually added a button explicitly that would show up in the new restaurant form. So a button that we control inside there. And then on click, we called a handle cancel method that I provided. So in handle cancel, that's where I called reset form. So that actually worked in the end. That actually cleared out the validation error from the form as we would expect. And then I call a passed in on cancel method. So because this logic is executed within the form itself, we have access to that reset form function that Formik makes available to us. So the form itself can take control of clearing itself out. And it still doesn't know about the fact that it's in a modal. So like the form itself has a cancel functionality built in. Then it calls the passed in on cancel prop. Down in our restaurant list page component, we pass an on cancel prop here. And then in here, we use this interesting sort of pre-React style functionality to close out the modal. Just like we do, I'll show that to you in the context of the form itself. No, not in the restaurant list page. So our callback to handle add restaurant sets the state, and then it closes the add restaurant modal programmatically. And so here we're canceling the add restaurant modal and closing it out programmatically as well. So that handles closing it out, and we're good to go. So that's how we're able to get the test to run. And then there was a little bit of cleanup I did after that. Let's just pull it up over here. Turns out I could have squashed this down later, but I had a separate commit where I was removing the separate cancel button that was automatically shown. So in the modal call, you can pass a list of actions, which is effectively the list of buttons that shows up in it. Let's see that in the docs here. I think it's down in the modal prop types. Actions. This is a list of the buttons to show in the footer of the modal, and the default is it has a close button there. I think I might have dug into the source code or something like that to see exactly how to format that, but that actually didn't really matter much in our case, because what we wanted to do was just say no actions in the footer of the modal, please. We just want it to be emptied out. So we want our cancel button and not their cancel button so that we get control and can run some form clearing functionality. I ended up changing the test a bit because this way, since we are creating the button ourselves, we were able to set our own data test property and call it. And so we gave it a name directly, and we're able to have a bit of a simpler test selector. So what else? After that, pass element ID for Formik. So let's see what this is. Get show. Okay, so this is next. So after this is what I ended up doing. At this point, I had the Cypress test passing, our end-to-end test, but our enzyme component test wasn't working. So I had to step through multiple steps to try to figure out what was happening. And this took me on a very interesting journey. So let's go back down this memory lane together. So enzyme was first failing because it said there was no ID. So Formik is set up so that you can, just to remind you what Formik is, I'll pull up the page here. So Formik is a form processing library, if you weren't here with us last time. It simplified React forms and removed a lot of the boilerplate that I personally don't prefer in React forms. But some of the downsides was it was abstracting away some of the details, and Enzyme was failing as a result. So Formik required an ID or a name for to be passed in with the change event so that it knows what form field you're working with. So I had to add this in to get past that error. This was not needed in the Cypress test because real browser events were happening, but when we were simulating that change event, we had to pass it in. All right, so that was one thing. What else? Next, we had this. It says simulate form submit directly. So previously, we were finding the button, the save button, and clicking it, and that was fine. But I think as a part of this process, I realized that I wanted the form to submit itself instead of just the button submitting, and that way if you hit return on the text field, the form automatically submits. So that's a very standard way to set up web forms. But I found that when I made that change, this test no longer worked, and this is because we were simulating a click on the button, but that did not automatically handle things like passing that through to the form it was on to simulate a submit event. So I found that for an enzyme test, I had to simulate the submit event on the form instead of the button click. So we're getting closer. Now there's some timing things. So I found that Formik, I'm not sure if I found this in the docs or just by experimentation, but I found that Formik runs the form submissions asynchronously on a separate run of the event loop. And this is probably necessary for it to be able to do things like handle, validations, sending callbacks to the server to confirm if things are valid or not, it makes sense that they would allow asynchrony to be more flexible. But as a result, the synchronous run of the enzyme test was causing a problem. So instead, I played around with a few different things, but I found what I was able to do is to take in ask for a done callback to call in my before each block to indicate that I was done. And then I found that I could just set a timeout for 0 milliseconds, but just run this timeout function on the next run of the event loop. I called done at that point, and so that was fine. That was enough to ensure that, just doing that once was enough to ensure that formic had run and the form had been processed so that we could check that the save handler was called and that the DOM had been updated and stuff like that. Except for no, the DOM was not updated. I had to do something else there too. So here was another click. I had to call wrapper.update, which is an enzyme method that you can call to ensure that the DOM re-renders. And so once I ran that, I was able to confirm that the text field was cleared out properly. So that was a lot of changes. That was a lot of implementation details that our test needed to know about. And so this is what folks mean, and specifically I'm thinking of Kent C. Dodds. I'll give him credit for this for sure. Talking about the pain of enzyme testing. And for our trivial form use case, it was fine and it worked well enough. But as we changed some implementation here, moving to formic, our enzyme test needed to change a lot. And there's a lot of noise in here, things that we don't really want to care about in our test. Let's take a look at that, the kind of final result of the test. And I'll zoom in just a little bit. So we've got this wait that needs to happen. Oh, no, this is actually something else. This is a secret. I don't want to show you this yet. Let's check this out. Yeah. So we have a set timeout that needs to happen. We're calling submit on the form, which is not clear. I mean, I'd like to be able to say that we were clicking the button. Wrapper update. This is just a lot of concerns, and I would just hate it if in a lot of my refactorings in the future that I would have to make more changes like this to handle the form being changed and refactored. So I started to feel that pain, and I felt like this was a great point to experiment with another library by Kent C. Dodds called React Testing Library. So I'll show you the page on this. Simple and complete React DOM testing utilities that encourage good testing practices. So a React Testing Library is sort of an alternative to Enzyme that you can run for your testing. So let's take a look at the changes that were required and compare it. A lot of times, this is when I'm motivated to try out a new library, is when I reach a pain point like this. Instead of just trying out all the new things in general, it's like, well, hey, I'm experiencing some pain with something I'm using. Let me check out something new. So let's check out my commit here. I installed it. Let's take a look at the changes that were required to switch to a React Testing Library. So we'll come back to these test IDs in a moment. So in my test itself, instead of pulling in mount from Enzyme, we pulled in render in its place. And then there's a few other helper functions to use. Wait was still needed. I'll talk about why. Fire event and cleanup. So let's see about those. So it's not conventional in React Testing Library to assign to a wrapper object. You probably could. I think that worked fine for me at first. But following their conventions, instead you tend to get some multiple, like an object with several functions that comes back from the render method. So we're still rendering and passing JSX to it, but instead we destructure the result to take a get by test ID method. And so this is where things get really interesting. So yeah, here we go. So the wrapper here of the structure of how we call the change event changes a little bit. So we call fire event was just the general function, or I guess a function that works as an object as well, returned by React Testing Library that we import from it. And we say fire event.change. So we want to change something. What do we want to change? Well, we want to get an element on the page, and we can call it get by test ID. And we pass it the test ID new restaurant name. So this is great. This is simpler than having to do a find and look for an input with data test equals new restaurant name. We just get by test ID new restaurant name. We're still passing into target, and we still need to pass the ID because formic needs that. So that's all right. That's fine. But so then here's where things get simpler. Instead of having to pull out the form and simulate a submit on it, we are able to call fire event click and get the save button. So we're able to go back to interacting with our save button directly. And I checked with Kent about this on Twitter because he had mentioned that anything you do with React Testing Library, you could also do with Enzyme. It's just that React Testing Library is a bit more opinionated to lead you into good practices and what Kent would recommend. But so he said that here, this is maybe there's a way to do this with Enzyme, but what he described as happening here is that your your elements, your React elements here are actually added to the DOM. I believe it's a JS DOM library here. And so because it's running in a DOM of some kind, the events are able to propagate. And so your click event to a button propagates up to the submit event on the form. So that's really nice for us not to have to think about whether there's a form submit event or not, but just do our click. Now I did find that I still needed to call a wait. Now it is nice that React Testing Library gives me a wait that I can call instead of having to do a set timeout. But I found that I had to have a wait, and if I returned it from before each instead of calling done, then that was nice and simple, kind of returning a promise. But I found that that was needed, and that was because I think there might be notes in React Testing Library about this. It's in there somewhere. So I think a lot of times you don't need to wait for anything, but in my case I did because we were actually asynchronously running Formic to make the changes. So I had to do that. It's fine. It's not too big a deal. There is a need for an after each. There's a cleanup function that you pass to after each to make sure that your elements are removed from the DOM afterwards so that your next test run is fine. And then check this out. This looks a lot simpler and clears the text field. So let's see how that works. We no longer have to explicitly update the wrapper. React Testing Library handles that for us. And then let's see here. So we're calling expect still. We don't have to call find with this long finder. We can just do get by test ID new restaurant name. That's simpler. And then instead of saying props value, we can just call dot value, which I think is actually pulling the value property off of the DOM element. So that's closer to what is exposed to the rest of the application. And then we check that that's equal to the empty string. So that's a lot simpler, and that works really great, and I like it a lot. So my experience here with React Testing Library has been very positive. I'm looking forward to trying out some more. I don't think we're going to need or really be tempted to use the shallow Enzyme's shallow mount in this project. It's something that I'm certainly not opposed to, and so for bigger apps and bigger project component libraries, I might certainly use shallow mounting. Kent doesn't prefer that. I could go either way at this point, but I'm open to kind of future experiences teaching me one way or the other. And certainly my experience with React Testing Library here has been very positive so far. So React Testing Library seemed like a great move towards keeping our tests more independent. I see on the diff here another change. Instead of a data test attribute, React Testing Library actually uses data test ID. That's hard-coded, and they don't actually give you an option to change that, and I'm all for that. Conventions are great, and so I just changed it to use data test ID, and I believe I had to update Cypress to follow with that as well, because Cypress is not opinionated about that, but we were fine. So we were good to go. That was the updates to our test to get our end-to-end and component suite running just fine. So with that review, let's just get to the latest. I think we're back to the latest. Let's make sure our component tests are running and make sure our end-to-end tests are running. Yeah, and so I actually haven't shown it off here, but you can see, well, it's not clear in the step here which one happened, but our end-to-end test actually went through here and was able to cancel out and confirm that the validation message was removed. So that's really great. All right, so what's our next feature? We are ready finally for our next feature. We're moving on. And our next feature I want to do, we've added a restaurant, but remember this app is an app for rating dishes at a restaurant. So I don't want to just add restaurants. And before I even move on to CRUD for all of the restaurant features, I want to move on to adding a dish underneath a restaurant. And that's going to lead us to having multiple routes in our application and drive us towards having more flexible state management. So it ends up being very interesting the way we end up going. So let's work through that. So this adding a dish is a new feature, and so this is a case where I want to create a new Cypress integration test. So we're going to do that. I think I'm actually gonna how do I split? I am back in Atom again. Let's split down. Let's keep adding a restaurant there, and we'll make a new test here, adding a dish. spec.js. Cool. So let's just create this new test. Describe. I'm going to use, for some reason I use double quotes there, so I like single quotes. Let's do that. Adding a dish. All right, it displays dish in the list. All right, so what are we going to do? We're going to have copy over cy.visit, and there's a way to configure Cypress to have the base URL of your application configured in a central place. Maybe if we go long enough on this live stream series, we'll move there, but it's easy enough to just paste this in here for right now. So we don't need to go through revalidating a lot of this. But I do want to do, and I think I'll go ahead and separate things out into steps with functions like this. Refer to that feature tours blog post I mentioned earlier if you want to learn more. I want to do add restaurant. And we are going to want the restaurant name to be shared. So I'm going to pull in that variable. But I am going to keep it just in this individual file, because right now that happens to be the same as in the adding a restaurant test, but it's not too essential that it is. That's certainly not essential to what we're doing in the application. So we'll duplicate over this adding restaurant method. I had a lot of line breaks between things before, but let's try not doing that. Let's see if things look too scrunched up together if we do that. So we want to click on the add restaurant button, type in the new restaurant name, save it, and then we don't need to validate it here. That's something that the adding a restaurant spec can handle for us, nor do we need to validate the restaurant name. This will just be a step that adds the restaurant, that performs that step for us. So now let's kind of drive things out one at a time. We can actually, it can be nice to have your tests to follow a similar pattern. So looking down at this test for adding a restaurant, this is very, very parallel. We're also adding something else to the list. And knowing my lack of visual design skills, it's going to look exactly the same with no visual distinguishers to help. Maybe I'll put a title in there or something like that. So let's follow the same pattern for the test. Modal not shown at the start. All right, so this is, in fact, so let's copy and paste this test. Modal not shown at the start. So here we were looking for a new restaurant name. Let's look for a new dish name. New dish name should not be visible. And that actually should pass because that is not there. But we want, before we do that, we want, once we've added a restaurant, we want to click on it to go to restaurant page. So let's go to restaurant page. In the past, I don't think I've broken that out into a separate function, but I kind of like the fact that that keeps our test itself at a high level, a single level of abstraction, and we have individual functions to go through different steps. Go to restaurant page, restaurant name. And I'm passing in the restaurant name here just to make the flow of data and dependencies very explicit. So let's say cy.contains. I believe this should work. Before we had used contains just to kind of check that the page contains something, but I think here we're actually this actually returns us an element as well. Like, give me the element that contains the restaurant name. And then what we can do is click on it. So this should hopefully take us to the page. We are going to confirm that the modal is not shown. And I think that should already pass. So let's actually just save it at this point and make sure that nothing blows up in our test suite or anything like that. The element will exist on the page, so I bet you it will in fact pass, but it just will be plain text that it clicks on. So let's go back to our list of all the tests, and we're going to run adding a dish now instead. We're clicking on a different test in our list and just focusing on that one for right now. Cool. So we were able to enter sushi place in our restaurant list, and then we were able to ensure that the input was not visible. Right now it's not visible because we don't have a dish page at all. So let's go ahead and move on. Instead of building that out because the test is not driving us there, let's get to the point where the end-to-end test is actually driving us to build out new functionality. So we said here, next we were checking that the modal can be canceled. So let's do that. This is kind of interesting because this is walking us through a different order of steps before. Do I want to do that, or do I want to go to actually get to the real functionality? It seemed natural enough to have the modal not shown at the start and to test that. But maybe there's a reason even to take that out at this point. I think we'll leave that in, but let's not do the modal can be canceled and modal displays validation errors yet. Let's go to our happy path first. Let's go to actually having the functionality work, and then we can add in the edge cases because that won't be very motivating yet to just write out a bunch of things that aren't working. So let's call it modal allows adding dish. And we'll pass in a dish name because we're going to need that, I believe. We'll call this volcano roll. That's one of the sushi rolls that I really enjoy. So modal allows adding dish. So let's add that function. And I'm not beyond looking at the test and copying and pasting. That's even when it's something that I know fairly well, which unfortunately I don't with Cypress because I would love to be using it on my 40-hour-week project, but that's not the case. I've not gotten to use Cypress yet. I'm very jealous of my coworkers that are using it and experiencing lots of benefits. I don't work for Cypress, but they're really great. All right, so I want to follow the structure of this other test. You don't have to, but given that I'm testing something the same, I'd like to follow the structure of it. So I'm going to copy it and paste it. And then we're going to review everything, though, including removing these line breaks. So I want to click on an Add Dish button. I like having these explicit rather than saying add button, because that kind of helps confirm that it is the add button for the dishes to help confirm it in the right place. Our production code is not yet in the right place, so this will help us. Then we're going to say in the new dish name field, we're going to type in the dish name we've passed in. We're going to click on the Save New Dish button, and we're going to confirm that new dish name should not be visible, so that text field should be gone, it should be hidden, and we're going to confirm that the page contains the dish name. So this, I think, is going to start breaking stuff, and this is going to allow us to actually move forward with our test. So let's, it's hard to get back to Chrome. There it is. Let's rerun our end-to-end test. It's going to take a few seconds while it's waiting to see if anything happens. And then it says, timed out retrying. Expected to find element, add dish button, but we never found it. All right, so it's time to implement this behavior. So, of course, we could add the dish button onto the restaurant list page, but that's not where we want it. We want a real different page with things. Oh, and this actually reminds me. So now we need a new page. We want a restaurant, a page that lists all the dishes in the restaurant. You could call it a restaurant detail page. But before we move there, we want to use some kind of routing to get there. So I want to use React Router. It's one of the most popular, probably the most popular routing library in React, although there's some interesting alternatives coming along lately. And so I want to refactor to using React Router. So instead of refactoring while we're under red here and the test is failing, I want to temporarily comment it out. I want to stop from our red-green refactor cycle here to first refactor to React Router, because it's just going to be a mess if we start building this out before the router is actually there. So what I'm going to do is, can I skip? Maybe I can just skip here. Describe.skip. We can, of course, not pull up that end-to-end test, but let's actually try here just to make sure our whole suite is passing. If we run all specs, I want to see if Cypress will just skip adding a dish. And it did. This is great. So adding a dish was skipped, and adding our restaurant has passed. So our end-to-end whole test suite is passing, and our component test suite is passing as well. So now that everything is green, we can refactor to using React Router while under this approach. And so I have actually done, once again, I have put a cake in the oven 30 minutes earlier, so it's ready. I've installed React Router, so that dependency is added into the app. If you haven't used React Router, it's a great way to use routing in your app to have different screens tied to URLs so that the URL actually updates in your application. So you're using URLs, which are one of the most amazing features of the web. Your React app continues to follow those patterns. So React Router is great. It says install React Router DOM. I forget if that's the command I put in, so let's show that to make sure. No, I added React Router. That's probably not what I wanted. So this cake was not ready 30 minutes early. So let's just do, but yeah, luckily Yarn is running super fast for me lately. Yarn remove React Router. Let's just quit our things. Might need to quit Cypress as well. Got my good old virus scan here. I'm just gonna force quit. Good times. Let's execute that remote code. Woo! And it's super fast now, of course. All right, so now we're going to follow instructions. Yarn add React Router DOM. Because React Router works for React Native as well, so that's another option. The point is, if you're also using React Native, you still have the option of using React Router. All right, so this time, we add React Router DOM. And we'll just append that to our list there. So now when we add React Router, we added the correct React Router this time. Good times. So let's follow their instructions here. So we actually want to add the router at the root of our application. We want to import it. Sorry this text is a little small, but you'll see it at least a little bit bigger when we put it in our app. So again, to reassert, what our goal here is to not change the behavior of our application at all. We just want to refactor to have our application run through React Router so we're ready to add in the routing functionality in the future. This is very, very, very famously, Kent Beck summarized this refactoring approach as make the change easy, then make the easy change. So instead of under red adding on React Router and doing a bunch of stuff at once, I want to refactor to use React Router to make the change easy. So that's one step and one commit in there. And then our next commit would be adding a new route for dishes. And so that commit will be smaller and easier to understand for code review or for us to review on the live stream. So let's add this step in to add React Router DOM. They're using double quotes, which I cannot abide. So let's see here. At the app level, so check it out. In our app right now, we have some layout stuff, and then we have the restaurant list page. So let's add in React Router DOM here. I like to use line breaks here to format stuff, and we'll see what we need each of these components for. I actually would rather put third-party components first, although my linter does not enforce it. I'm learning from my client project that has a stricter linter. So I've got my page down here. So now I've got React Router DOM in here, and let's kind of consult. You can't see this, so I'm just going to put this over on the cheater monitor so you don't have to be bothered with it. We'll increase that font size so I can see what's going on. And so in our app, we want a surrounding router around the whole thing. So I think we'll probably put that out here. Here's the router around everything. We do still want this layout here at the top level of the app. But then in here, we want to display different routes. So this, we don't just always want to display restaurant list page. We want to say there's a route here, and it's at path of the root of our app, the root route, at the root of our app. You say exact when you want this to only show up just when you're at / at the root level of the app, not when you're at something nested under there. And then you say component equals restaurant list page. And so, list page. And this is one reason that it was nice, and that's why I worked ahead on the side, or having done this in the past, to have just a component that can show up without any props passed into it. That allows you to kind of refactor the structure of your application at this level a lot easier. So now that should show up there. I'm sure I'm missing something, because I'm usually missing something. I think I don't need a link at this point, because we're not linking to anything. We're just literally showing the one app. But all the routing is going to happen inside this layout here. So the layout of the rows and columns to kind of fit things in responsively still happens at the root level of the app. So let's save it. Let's restart the app. I could run the test first, and I'm sure our, you always want to run it, but I'm sure our component tests are still going to pass because we haven't touched the individual components. And I would expect that probably Cypress is going to rerun just fine as well. I'm going to restart Cypress just in case I've forgotten something. Oh, it looks like my layout. Let me check the layout here. I think I've got some stuff overlapping with other stuff. Yeah, so you haven't been able to see that the whole time. There we go. So we're opening Cypress up again. Our component test passes just fine. But while Cypress is starting, I do want to at least eyeball it here. I want to pull up the page. Localhost 1234. And it is coming up. So I see it. I see new restaurant coming up. That cancel button is not the most beautiful thing in the world, but like I said, I'm not a visual person. Any visual designers are welcome to come in and submit a PR request to this open source application to make it look better, especially if you're familiar with React Materialize. So this smoke test of just like, does the app come up, looks just fine. So now let's run all of our end-to-end specs again. I'm expecting they'll work just fine because we've done this minor refactor just to add React Router in. Of course, if this is the first time you're playing with React Router, you might want to spike it. You want to experiment more because, like, nothing has changed. So we're not totally sure that, we're sure that React Router hasn't broken anything, but we're not sure that we've set it up properly to be able to add in the additional routes later. But I've experimented with React Router at least enough to feel confident that we're good here. We'll see if I regret this confidence later. So I think we're good. We have refactored. We have added in React Router. So let's review these changes we've made, and let's move the component test up there because we're not going to need that too much. So we have added in router to our app component, moved the import around. We added the router wrapper around it, and then an individual route that renders the restaurant list page. So the route renders the restaurant list page, as Dr. Seuss would say. Dr. Seuss rhymes, not alliterates. Maybe he alliterates. I don't know. And then we have the adding a dish spec. So that is in our file system, but we don't need to commit that yet because that's not actually related to what we're changing here. So we're going to say refactor to render app through React Router. More R's, just non-stop R's. This is great. Cool, so we've refactored under green, and now we can come back and uncomment this test here. And we can come back to Cypress and run the adding a dish spec. So notice here, this is just a great principle. Like I could have prepared, if I had thought to prepare, to do that refactor before we wrote the test. But you don't have to do that. And I don't generally do that when I'm doing test-driven development on a real project. I'll start building out the feature I need, and then when I find that I need a refactor, I might pause, I might switch to another branch to build something out, or I might build it out and then commit just that individual refactoring first. It's good to have a nice clear set of steps for refactoring. So let's think back to our test that we've now re-enabled. On our adding a dish test, we're able to add this restaurant, but then we click on Sushi Place, which does nothing because it's just text on a page, and then our app is expecting there to be a new dish named text field. Wait. No, our app is expecting there to be an add dish button, but it's not there because we haven't actually navigated to a new page. So this is what we want to do. We want to get our app to navigate to a page that shows an add dish button. So let's do it. So what order do I want to do this in? Let's do this outside in as well and write the code we wish we had, because that's a common approach for end-to-end testing. For outside in TDD in particular. So what we want is another route. We want another route that's at path. Let's, because I'm a Rails guy, let's model this in typical Rails URL style. We'll say restaurants, because maybe there'll be other stuff in our app besides restaurant pages. And then let me make sure, checking those React router docs to make sure I get it right. Where are them? Dynamic. There we go. Let's see if I do this right. Very likely that I might not. So we want a restaurant with an ID. Actually, it's not an ID now. It's name. Yeah, our restaurants don't have IDs yet because we're not saving them to the server side. So let's say the name goes into the URL. That'll get weird with spaces, but we'll fix it once we start persisting this to the server side in the future. And we don't need to say exact now, at least yet, because that's just going to be one specific page. And we want to have a component that renders this route. We can call this restaurant detail page. For now, it's going to have a list of dishes, but it might have other things in the future. So we'll call it restaurant detail page. So our linter is helpfully telling us that that's not defined, so we need one. So let's make one. We wish that we could import a restaurant detail page from that page component. And we can keep all our components in one folder now. That's fine. Good enough. Maybe we'll do that as a separate refactor in the future. So we have a restaurant detail page. That's certainly going to fail, so we do not need to try that out yet. We can just create the restaurant detail page. So in this case, I don't... do I want to look at the format of restaurant list page? Let's keep it simple for right now. So we want to import React from React component. I know that at least for now, this is going to be a stateful page as well, a stateful component. So I'm going to go ahead and make it a class component. Restaurant detail page extends component. We want a render method. And here we're going to return. I forget if I use parentheses elsewhere for my return statements, but that's okay. I always forget to type class here for some reason. Maybe I just want to be writing functional components. I'm not sure. We want to return something. We can put a div wrap in it, I suppose, and we don't need a test to drive us to that. That'll just kind of prepare us in the future. But let's add that button. What is that button supposed to say? Let's find out. Data test ID add dish button. And again, we could, add a div or anything with a data test ID add dish button, but we know it's going to be a button, so let's make it a button. And I'm just going to copy and paste that import of React materialize from over there. I'll keep it multi-line because I'm sure we're going to add stuff later. Button data test ID, I think is what we called it. Add dish button. I'm going to check the phrasing of the label. Add restaurant. Cool. And again, now that we're starting our next feature and we're doing the outside-in test-driven development, remember, we want to write just enough code to get the current test to pass. Again, using the code we wish we had, so we are using multiple routes for it, but within the route, we're going to just write just enough to get it to pass. We're just going to add the button. That's all for now. We're going to wait until the test drives us to add more visuals and add more components and more DOM elements to that page. So when we save this, if I've done it right, it should pass. Looks like I'm getting an error here. What's that error? Cannot resolve dependency restaurant detail page. I think I'm actually going to need to restart parcel. I'm sure there's a better way to set parcel up, but it seems like in my setup here, when I add a new file, at least when it's I've added the import before the file is there, it errors out on me. So let's rerun Cypress. We don't need to restart Cypress for that because it's running as a separate process, just hitting our site on localhost 1234. Let's rerun the test and see if we've in fact gotten ourselves past the current error. We rerun. Oh, right. I forgot about something else that's happening here. We've added that dish button, but the point is that we needed to actually get the sushi place here to link over to the other screen. So now we can use the link component of React Router for that. So let's do that. And incidentally, like, this is not some big mess up that I've done. This isn't a failure of test-driven development. It's totally fine. This kind of stuff happens all the time on real projects that I'm on. So this would be within a restaurant list. And so we're going to import blobutil. I don't remember adding blobutil. I think that was an autocomplete. I think that was not needed. Let's just delete that. Oh, well, I'll leave it. I'll come clean that up some other time. All right, so right now in our collection item, we just list out the restaurant names. Instead, what we want is import link from React Router DOM. Yeah, React Router DOM. And then in here, we're just going to do, within the collection, we're going to link to the restaurant name. I think it's link to restaurants. Oh, you know what I want here is I actually want a string literal, a template string literal, restaurants, restaurant name. Because again, we don't have IDs for the restaurant yet, but now we do. In the future, we will. So this should link to that screen. So now I think I'm expecting this to work. Yeah, so check it out. So we clicked on Sushi Place. And it's nice that Cypress gives us this virtual address bar here that shows us we've navigated to restaurants, sushi, blah, 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 place. So again, having a space in the URL is a little weird. We get some URL encoding, but that'll be fixed once we switch to IDs and save it on the server. Totally fine for now. So now there is an add dish button, and it was able to click on it. And now the next error we're getting in the test is that we're looking for a new dish name to be able to fill text into it, and we didn't find it. So now we need to start implementing our form on this page. Again, we have the question of what's the simplest possible way to do it? Do we really want to just add a text field or add anything on the page with a test ID of new dish name, or do we want to write the code we wish we had? Now that we've established the pattern of using formic for a form, I want to continue using it. And so let's kind of look at that code and duplicate it over here to kind of get the same approach, and even using the same kind of component structure. So we'll pull out the restaurant list page and the restaurant detail page. Can I just drag it down? That's cool. Okay, great. So let's see how we structured this. So on here, we had a modal component from React Materialize, and then the button we have is actually passed as the trigger. So it's kind of this sort of interesting inside-out approach. Yep, and then the contents of the modal are the new restaurant form. So let's go ahead and add this. And again, this is going to be a number of steps that we're taking together here, but this is kind of just following the pattern that we established on our previous form. And if we find that we've added stuff that we don't need or it doesn't work, we can revert to make sure we're not committing code more than we need to pass the test. All right, so we've got the modal. Let's just kind of follow the pattern from down here. Modal ID. Let's leave that off for now. I know the tests are going to drive us to need that ultimately to close out the modal, but let's follow the pattern from our other screen, but keep it minimal for now. And that way, even our diff is going to be simple to show us this is the minimum needed to add this step. So I will add a header though. A test is never going to drive us there. So let's say new dish. That's going to make it nice for us. I'll go ahead and have the actions here to not have the close button so that we're able to kind of add that in when we need it. Trigger, and although I don't love just kind of inline JSX in arguments, like in props that are passed like this, I'd much rather put that in a function for something bigger. This is just very simple, and it's idiomatically part of the React Materialize modal, so I'm fine with that. So there's our modal. I might even just say hello world in here so we can see it. So let's just see if this is working. This won't kind of take us to the next this won't fix the error we're on, but let's see if this blows up or not. Okay, so we have a new dish modal that opens up, and we have hello world in it, so that's fine. So now we still need to add this new dish name field, but I don't want to do that yet. I want to add a form element. So let's do that. Let's write the code we wish we had here, and we're going to break parcel again. New dish form. And we could just stop there. Maybe we will. I think I would like to stop there because I just like to think through adding in on save and on cancel as we need them. So that's just sort of a judgment call, but that's the way I want to go right now. So we'll have a new dish form here. Parcel going to blow up, or at least not until I go to the page maybe. So let's go ahead and create that component. New, nope, it's supposed to be over here. New dish form. And let's down here open up the new restaurant form to compare it. We are going to want all these imports, so I'm going to leave them in. New dish form. I probably wouldn't copy and paste code if I didn't understand it, but given that this is a pretty simple React form, I am going to just copy and paste over so that it kind of follows the same approaches. I'm going to hold off on validate and handle save for the moment and on handle cancel, but I am going to make render form. Let's hold off on that as well. Let's walk through, because formic is new to me, let's step through adding formic one little bit at a time to make sure it makes sense and make sure we're thinking through it. Okay, so we want to use formic to handle the state of our form because it worked out really well, other than needing to switch our unit testing library, but that's probably something we needed to do anyways. So formic is great, so we want it. Initial values, we want this to say dish name. As a quick pause here, the other reason I am copying and pasting, but I'm only adding a little bit at a time is, like, what if I copied and pasted at all? Maybe I would have forgotten about restaurant name, and so maybe things would have accidentally worked, but there was an unneeded property in there. It's much better to keep your code simpler, and so by copying and pasting just a little bit at a time, I'm able to follow the existing pattern while also making sure things are minimal. I'm going to take off validate and on submit for now. We'll come back to that. And so now we do need to render the form. So let's go ahead and have that. This, I'm going to type out because I want to add just a little bit at a time. So we're going to have a render form, and it's going to be a class property arrow function. We're going to take in these arguments and destructure them. We want values because we want to handle that state. We're going to need handle change. We don't need handle submit or anything like that. But this values and handle change, we're going to want to get the input to show up. I mean, I suppose we could not have them to make it not a controlled component, but it's going to be nice, so it's fine. All right, so we got render form there. Did I, in this approach, I did not add a semicolon. I'm still not sure if that's consistent styling or not. Form here, we want to form around it. That'll be nice. We'll add the row just to stay consistent with the styling we needed last time here to get things to format nicely. And then we have the React materialize input here. Put in this sizing for consistency here. We'll add a label, although the test doesn't drive us there because we know our form input, we're going to want a label for it. Dish name, ID equals dish name, and this is going to be what's going to map it to the values that we get down there. Formic actually uses that ID. Value equals values dot dish name. Do I want to go ahead and put the error in? I don't want to put the error in because I want the test to drive us to have that validation error, so let's not pass that in yet. On change, this is a React form, so we're going to need that on change. That's for sure. And then we want the data test ID to get the test to pass. New dish name. So this is rendering out a form using formic. It doesn't like those trailing spaces. I think this might work, so let's try it. We'll rerun our end-to-end test to let the test drive us there. No, something is blown up. New dish form is not defined. Parcel is not okay with that, so we got to restart parcel, and then it's going to be okay with that. And luckily, it's pretty quick to start up. So now we'll rerun. We'll see if parcel. Probably I have a typo. Yep, I have a typo. New dish form is not defined. Parcel, I'm so sorry I blamed you. Like, that is not your fault. I am sorry my linter did not warn me about that. Probably has something to do with the JSX. It doesn't know that it's a component and not just an HTML tag. All right, so check it out. Our input opened up, dish name, volcano roll, we were able to type into it, so we've actually moved to the next test. So we wrote a bunch of stuff that time to get the code we wish we had, and now we're on to the next test failure. Timed out data, saving new dish button. Expected to find it, but never did. So that's easy to add. We can just add in that button. So this step is going to be a lot quicker. So let's follow the pattern we have from here in our new dish form. We're going to add another row. We're going to add a button. That's right, in React Web, we're going to want to put the contents inside of it as text. Save. What do we call that? Save new dish button. data test ID equals save new dish button. I think I found working with React Materialize, I forget if it was on the stream or after the stream, that I did actually need to explicitly set this type to submit, because it's going to default to a button of type button, but if I have type submit, then it's going to turn into a submit button, which I want to be able to submit the form that I'm on. Now the test is not driving us to do anything when the form is submitted yet. We just want to add this button in. I suppose I got to leave off that submit for now. Let's do it. Let's rerun that test, see if we're good. All right, cool. So interesting. So that save happened. It closed the modal. I wonder if in the same way that the modal catches when we click on a button inside of the trigger and triggers an event, I wonder if it catches a button when the event propagates up inside the modal and automatically closes it. I'm not actually sure. That's really interesting. But regardless, so yeah, that actually has potentially automatically caused us to automatically pass the next test where we confirm that the dish name input is not visible. So we know the next error we got is that the page should contain volcano roll, which we typed in, but it doesn't. So we know we're going to need to get there. As a small step towards that, I'm going to change the button to type submit and see what happens. I'll bet you this will cause the modal not to close. Oh, it actually refreshed the page, which is going to be confusing. So that another thing here. Let's add in. We know we're going to want a submit handler for the form. With web development, there's enough things happening that it's not always like I need to literally have the test drive me and tell me exactly what I need to do next. Things are just a bit messier when it comes to user interfaces, but test-driven development still totally applies. So we're going to have a handle submit. Wait, we call it handle save here? Oh, yeah. This is Formic handle submit, so I'm actually really glad for that distinction. So Formic is going to take a handle submit. I'm going to pass that there. And then down in the Formic implementation, we're going to say on submit equals this.handle save. That's going to go up to this handle save. Yeah, I'm just following the same patterns that I followed before, partially to be consistent and partially because I don't work with Formic day to day. Let's not take anything in yet. Let's just have a function here so it doesn't blow up, because I was hoping, I was just hoping to not have it close the modal to figure out what's going on there. So let's try this. Yeah, so here we go. So now the save is a submit button. It submits to the form submit handler. So now that event, presumably that event doesn't bubble up to React Materialize's modal and it doesn't automatically close. That's more what I would have expected. And if we were like hand implementing this modal, that's more likely what would have happened. So now we're getting this next error where we expect the input dish name not to be visible, but it is still visible. So now it's time to manually put back in the things that that React Materialize was helpfully adding for us. But this is what we want, because just like we found out last time, we need to intercept this event to do stuff with. So I want to call on save. And let's do it this way. Let's say we have on save, and we're going to call it without any arguments being passed around, because we just want to close the modal for now. On save. And then back on our page, our form, we want to have, at this level, we want to have a handle add dish. And we'll come up here. We'll say, in our restaurant detail page, we want handle add dish. Another class property arrow function. Let's take in no arguments for now. And then we're going to use this very atypical non-React add dish modal. We didn't give it an ID. So now we want to give it an ID. So let's move that over. I don't know why I copied that. That's not particularly helpful. We want an ID to reference it by. And then up here we want add dish modal close. So this should be the minimum code necessary in our current architecture to close out the modal. Is that the error we were getting? Expected dish name not to be visible. Yeah, so let's do that. I've got a bit of a cough right now. Sweet. So now we have re-implemented what the Materialize was doing for us to close out the modal, but now we have control of it to pass the data around. We expected to find the content volcano roll, but we never did. So now we want to follow the pattern we established before to pass that data out of the form back to our containing page, our containing list. So let's follow that pattern. we want to pull out of values, out of the values that Formic provides to us, we want to pull out the dish name. We want to pass that to the onSave. We can put a line break in there, that'd be good. We don't need reset form yet, we'll wait until the tests drive us there. So we'll pass the dish name through, and then what are we going to do here? I think we're going to need some state. That's right. So we need to store the list of dish names in the component here. If you think about it for more than a fraction of a second, you might realize the problem that this is going to cause. But we're taking a bit of a naive TDD approach here. Like, let's just write the minimal code to get things to pass. We don't have a state management layer of any kind. Let's do this, and let's, we know we're going to want to store these dish names somewhere a bit more robustly. But let's let the test force us there. That way we have test coverage to ensure that we're storing the dish name somewhere robust. So for now, let's just do it this way. You wouldn't always have to do this in a real application. You might start out with your state management layer, but this is sort of like the small TDD approach that we're taking for instruction purposes here. So in handle add dish, so now we're going to do a this set state. We're going to take the dish names, and we're going to take the new dish name, call it that, and have the existing dish name. So now in the state, we're passing back dish names. We're going to add new dish name onto the front and then include all the existing ones there as well. So I think this may pass the test. No, the reason it doesn't pass the test is because we're not actually showing those dish names on the page. So that's the next thing the test has driven us to. We are getting the same error, but previously we got the same error because we weren't saving that data in any way. We were completely throwing it out. Now the reason we don't get that error is because we're not rendering it out. You don't have to take this small step. I just forgot to do it. So let's do it now. And we'll just follow the pattern here. Restaurant list, yeah, okay. So we already got a subcomponent here. So let's follow that pattern. Row. Get this in quick so we don't stay too long. Dish list. All right, so let's pull this out. Oh, we want those dish names pulled out of the state. Dish list. And this, with the addition of this component, this is getting complex enough that probably next time I want to refactor the folder structure. Let me say refactor folder structure, because they're getting a lot of intermix. Like, clearly some of these are more closely related than others. So let's do kind of a broader copy paste here and get rid of that data URL to blob. But we're going to need that, and we don't need any links yet. We've got a dish list here. Dish names. Of course, if we had lots and lots of screens like this, we might abstract this out, but we don't need to do that yet. I'll have a header dishes, not rishes because we're not Scooby-Doo. Dish names down to a dish items. Again, this is already kind of refactored into like several functional components, but that's okay. I think we can do it quickly. Take in the dish names in the list, and again, if we get an error because we have our test, we can just rerun very quickly. No dish items. Even this, like this already feels like something that we could abstract out, but I don't want to do it now. Dish names. No dish items, none added yet. Some dish items. Even to like reduce this duplication of the style, color, gray, and stuff like that. That'd be nice to kind of abstract out. Dish names, dish name, and we rest a dish name around. We don't need a link because we're not linking anywhere yet. And I would actually hold off on that until we have some functionality that requires us to click on the dish name to link it. We might not even implement it that way. That's a lot of dish list stuff. Let's see if there's the word restaurant in here anywhere. Yep. Nothing else in there, so we might be good. Bet you we're going to need to restart partial, but let's see. Run through the test. Row is not defined. Okay, that's probably just a lack of an import. Row. Dish list is not defined. And we're good. Check it out. So we got dishes, we got a title showing up, we got volcano roll shown in there. And we can use Cypress's feature again to kind of hover over and see the previous steps. So as we go back, there is the modal with volcano roll on it. And then previously we had dishes with none added yet. And again, you could write a test to confirm that none added yet shows up there. You could also do a component test and have a reusable component that display lists like this to say none added yet. This is fine for us for now. And so we're cool. Let's play around with it real quick, just in our own. You see here we have restaurants, none added yet, sushi place. We can add it. We can click on it. Now we're on a dishes screen. Dishes for the sushi place. California roll. I'm not that adventurous with my sushi. California roll is great too. Sweet, so we're good. With that, we'll call it a day. We've finished the first test driving out of our first new feature for this. This time, I did not, interestingly, I've just noticed I did not write any component tests. I didn't step down because I was following the pattern of the existing component. And that's not necessarily a problem. I would be okay with coming back and doing the unit test after the fact here. Or next time I might go through and kind of undo that component and redo it, adding the test in to make sure we have good test-driven coverage. So we'll see what we do. But until then, we'll catch you next time. Thanks so much for joining in on the stream or the recording. And feel free to hit me up on Twitter at Coding It Wrong, or to connect with me on the, let me see the channel name to make sure I know it, on Reactiflux, the React Discord chat. I'm in the testing channel, and also I keep an eye on the Jest channel as well in there. So any questions or thoughts or experiences you have about testing, let me know what you think of React Testing Library. Let me know what you think of Cypress. Be glad to chat with you. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you next time. Let's go to the slide. See ya.